This morning, CNN has learned that this woman has been detained by Russian authorities in connection with Sunday's deadly bombing at a cafe in St. Petersburg. Here's the moment we want to show you that it injured, the moment of the blast. You see it right there. It injured more than 30 people, killed a prominent military blogger known to be a major supporter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin has said that Ukraine could be behind the attack. However, no evidence has been presented yet to support that claim. And then there is this newly released video, which shows this same woman, now under arrest, outside the cafe that same day, carrying a box. And Russian media have also put out photographs of that woman standing near the blogger who was killed. This was just inside the cafe right before the explosion. CNN's Fred Pleitgen is following all of this from Berlin. He's joining us now. Fred, what are we learning about this woman who has just been detained?
Well, her name is Daria Trepkova, and right now this is an anti-terror investigation as far as the Russians are concerned. It was quite interesting because just a couple of hours ago, the Russians put out a video of her apparently being interrogated by that anti-terror committee, and she was asked, look, do you know why you're here? And she said, yes, because I gave the figurine to Vladimir Tatarsky, who of course is that military blogger who was killed. She was then asked who she got that figurine from, and she said that she didn't want to say at that point in time. So clearly they are already confronting her with that. And we did see those photographs also on that video of her apparently going inside that cafe with that box. We also have an eyewitness testimony of someone who saw her give that to Vladimir Tatarsky. I want to read you what that eyewitness said. She said, quote, when she gifted him the figurine, she went to sit in a different place at the window, so obviously away from the stage where the explosion took place. The host at the stage took the figurine from the box and showcased it. Vladin held it for a bit. They put it back, and shortly after, the explosion happened. That's sort of a rundown what happened then. Her husband, Trepkova's husband, he came out earlier today, and he said he believes that she was framed, that she didn't know what was inside the figurine that she gifted to that military blogger. Obviously, you were already saying that the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians might be behind it. The Ukrainians are already denying that. They're also saying that they believe that she had contact with Alexei Navalny, with Navalny's organization, of course, the opposition leader. That organization has also denied that as well, Kate.
So then, Fred, what else are you learning about the military blogger who was killed?
So I think one of the things to make clear to our viewers is I think military blogger is probably an understatement. On the face of it, that's what Vladimir Tatarsky was. He was very prominent in that sphere. He had more than 500,000 followers on Telegram. But these military bloggers essentially are supporters of the war in Ukraine. And one of the things that's interesting about them is that they embed quite frequently with Russian forces there. It's also something that Vladimir Tatarsky did as well. But they are also among the few people who are allowed to criticize the way that the war is being led. That doesn't mean they're against it. In fact, they are for it, but they want the Russians to be even tougher and be more brutal. That's one of the things that Vladimir Tatarsky also did. And one of the things that he notoriously did is when Russia announced the annexation of 4 territories in Ukraine, he essentially said that the Russians would kill anyone who stood in their way and would loot anyone that they wanted to as well. So certainly he was someone who was hated by the Ukrainians, definitely someone who was in favor of the war, but also someone who criticized the way that the Russian military is doing it for allegedly not being tough enough.
And knowing all that, I mean, this happened in St. Petersburg. Are you hearing anything about how, if and how his death is impacting others like him, other supporters of Russia's military operation and the invasion from within Russia?
Yeah. Yeah, supporters, and when you mention supporters, I think it's important to point out that it's supporters like him, bloggers, but also people who, for instance, support the war in a more ideological way as well. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that this is the second time that a very prominent pro-war supporter has been assassinated. In August of last year, I was in Moscow when Daria Dugina, who's the daughter of Alexander Dugin, one of the main sort of ideologues who many say delivers the ideological foundation for Russia's war in Ukraine, she was assassinated on a street in Moscow and by a car bomb. And now for the second time, certainly this is something that will send chills down the spines of many of the prominent people who support Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, Kate.
So interesting. Fred, thank you very much. And John, there are a lot of questions still about what's happened here, but there's also a lot, this isn't the only news coming out of Russia right now.
No, that's exactly right, Kate, because just in, Russian state media is reporting that Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich has filed an appeal to his arrest. Gershkovich faces up to 20 years in prison after being arrested there last week. He is the first U.S. journalist to be detained by Moscow on espionage charges since the Cold War. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to demand his release. Lavrov blamed Washington and the Western press for politicizing the arrest and said the fate of Gershkovich would be determined by a Russian court. Secretary of State Blinken also called for the release of Paul Whelan, who is serving a 16-year sentence for espionage, which, of course, Whelan and the U.S. disputes. Blinken and Lavrov have only spoken 3 times since Russia invaded Ukraine. Each of those calls focused on trying to free detained Americans.